2025 to 2026 series, Disability in the Ancient Middle East and Mediterranean. The program is co-sponsored by the Archaeological Research Facility at UC Berkeley and the Bade Museum of Archaeology at Pacific School of Religion. My name is Melissa Craddock. I'm Assistant Director and Curator at the Bade Museum. And before I introduce today's speakers and invite them to take the stage, I'm going to take a moment to read an introductory statement about this year's program on behalf of the Bade Museum. The Bade Museum is an institution dedicated to advancing knowledge of the archaeology and history of the ancient Levant. Over the course of a few years, we at the museum have come to realize that advancing such knowledge means reflecting on and engaging with perspectives that have been largely ignored by modern-day society and, as a result, have been erased from mainstream historical narratives. The Bade Museum particularly welcomes scholars who are engaging with marginalized perspectives that contribute to creating better equity in scholarship and in society more broadly. This series, Disability in the Ancient Middle East and Mediterranean, provides a platform for research on the experiences of people with disabilities whose voices have been frequently overlooked in study of the ancient world. This program bridges the past and present through study of disability in antiquity, its contemporary reception, accessibility, and its continuing impact today, contributing to a more nuanced, inclusive, and complete narrative of the past. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so with that said, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Lissette Jiménez and Dr. Elizabeth Miner. Dr. Lissette Jiménez is Associate Professor of Museum Studies at San Francisco State University, where she also serves as Director and Faculty Curator of the Ancient Mediterranean at the Global Museum. She is an archaeologist and museum professional whose research focuses on ancient Egypt, object biographies, and inclusive museum pedagogy. She earned her PhD in Near Eastern Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and is co-editor of Teaching Ancient Egypt in Museums, Pedagogies and Practice, which was published by Routledge in 2024. And that volume explores new object-based approaches to teaching and interpreting Egypt's cultural heritage in museums. Dr. Jiménez has worked extensively with anthropological collections and on archaeological excavations. She has also served as Associate Curator and Interim Director at the Bade Museum in Berkeley and has worked on excavations at El Hiba and Amhida in Egypt, as well as at Nemea in Greece. In Egypt, she directed the Abydos Archives Conservation Field School, a collaboration with the Ministry of Antiquities that provided hands-on conservation training to Egyptian museum professionals. Her current research examines the history of San Francisco State's ancient Egyptian collection, interpreting its objects and mummified individuals within an anti-colonial framework. Dr. Elizabeth Miner, our second speaker for today, is an assistant professor of anthropology at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. She is an anthropologist who specializes in the ancient Nile Valley, museums, human-computer interaction, and cultural heritage management. She also earned her PhD in Near Eastern Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. She holds 20 years of experience with anthropological museum collections, including the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the Sudan Museum in Khartoum, the British Museum, the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology, and the Wellesley College Davis Museum. Her digital museum projects focus on connecting diverse audiences with cultural heritage, especially through community collaboration and student-led creative interactive design. Dr. Miner is co-director and PI for a National Science Foundation-funded project which uses community-based research practices to better understand cultural resilience under the changing climate of the ancient Middle Nile through analysis of historical museum collections and ethnography. She also has over 20 years of field archaeology experience, excavating in Egypt since 2005, Sudan since 2014, California since 2002, and Massachusetts since 2017. She's currently exploring her home state of California as she develops a digital California cultural heritage project. Now, given the backgrounds and biographies of our two speakers, I'm especially excited to invite them to take the floor today with their talk called Accessing Ancient Egypt, Inclusive Strategies for Museum Learning with Collections and Digital Tools. Dr. Miner and Dr. Jiménez, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you. So today we're going to be speaking on accessing ancient Egypt, inclusive strategies for museum learning with collections and digital tools. Thank you for inviting us to open this lecture series on disability in the ancient world. Our talk takes a slightly different approach. Rather than examining disability in ancient Egypt itself, we focus on how museums can use accessible and inclusive strategies to support learning about ancient Egypt. We will highlight digital interpretive projects created by museum studies students at San Francisco State University that expand across collections, that expand access to collections and model inclusive strategies for learning with both collections and digital tools. As you heard, together we bring over 50 years of experience across a wide range of museums. We have seen how museums can serve as powerful spaces for learning, where objects, stories, and communities come together to illuminate the ancient past and its relevance today. For this learning to be meaningful, however, it must also be accessible. And by accessibility, we mean creating opportunities for people of all abilities to engage fully, physically, socially, and intellectually with collections and knowledge they hold. So in this presentation, we will explore how ancient Egyptian collections can be made more accessible through inclusive approaches, ranging from exhibit design that meets accessibility standards to the creative use of digital interpretation. Strategies such as tactile interactives, clear wayfinding, virtual reality, and enhanced storytelling can broaden participation, deepen engagement, and extend interpretive reach, ensuring that Egypt's ancient stories are not only displayed, but fully experienced by all visitors.
To ground these ideas in practice, we turn to the Global Museum. Founded in 2014 within the Museum Studies program at San Francisco State University, the museum's public gallery opened in 2018. The Global Museum is a cultural museum dedicated to the stewardship of ancient and contemporary collections spanning a wide scope of time and geography, from ancient Egypt to Oceania, the Americas, and Asia. Ancient Egypt is the most represented culture in the collections, with over 700 objects, and 2 mummified individuals brought to San Francisco by Adolf Sutro in the 1880s. The museum also serves as a laboratory for scholarship through the Museum Studies program, giving students hands-on experience in collections care, exhibition making, and digital interpretation. At the same time, it fosters community by engaging the university and wider Bay Area audiences in meaningful encounters with cultural heritage. This is the context in which we have developed accessibility and inclusive learning strategies for exploring ancient Egypt, bringing together stewardship, scholarship, and community in ways that reflect the museum's commitment to openness and participation. This diagram here on the right shows how we approach inclusive museum practice. It illustrates how accessibility, learning frameworks, visitor engagement, and creativity build upon one another in layers. At the center is the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, framed here as a barrier removal, the baseline that ensures visitors can enter spaces, access programs, and receive information in multiple formats. Without this foundation, nothing else can function. The next layer is Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, which moves us beyond minimum compliance. Instead of asking only, is it accessible, UDL asks, is it engaging for everyone? UDL emphasizes inclusion by offering multiple ways to present information, engage with content, and demonstrate learning. Building on this is visitor-centered practice, which places the audience at the core. The curation and interpretation are shaped not only by collections and curators, but also by the perspectives and experiences of the communities we serve at the Global Museum. Finally, the outer layer is the creative impetus, or the driver of innovation. With accessibility, inclusion, and visitor-centered practice in place, creativity can thrive here. Exhibitions, including those about Egypt, can become participatory, multisensory, and transformative, experiences that invite visitors into new forms of meaning making. Read from the inside out, the diagram shows a progression from barrier removal to inclusion to engagement and ultimately to innovation. This is the arc we will trace throughout our talk today. We've seen how inclusion builds in layers, but what does that look like here in practice? At San Francisco State, the Global Museum has partnered with the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability, whose mission is to share disability history and culture in order to challenge stereotypes, promote critical thinking, and build inclusive communities. In 2019, colleagues from the Longmore Institute worked with us to move beyond ADA compliance and explore strategies for making the museum more welcoming and accessible. Their input shaped practices in exhibit label writing, wayfinding, and gallery layout, standards that now guide every exhibition we create in the museum. Accessibility consultants also conducted walkthroughs, identifying ways to improve access through clearer signage, improved lighting, and revised text labels with larger fonts and thumbnail images to linked texts and objects. They also reviewed student-developed audio guides. Together, these collaborations helped us establish practices that go beyond compliance to create more inclusive exhibitions. More recently, we've partnered with the San Francisco-based Blind Posse, founded by Dr. Stanley Yarnell, who you can see here on the right, who is dedicated to making museums more inclusive for people who are blind or have low vision. Their input has been crucial in developing accessible learning experiences for our current Ancient Egypt exhibit. Through these partnerships, we've learned that inclusion is not about adding features after the fact, what might be called performative inclusion, but about cultivating thoughtful inclusion. And this means beginning with community expertise, designing with access from the start, and treating disabled community members as co-creators. These collaborations remind us that real inclusion is relational and intentional. It grows out of authentic partnerships, and it deepens learning for all audiences in the museum. Now that we've looked at disability-centered inclusion, let's broaden the lens to other communities we serve. Many of our visitors are English language learners, while others, including K-6 students and SF State students, have different learning needs. In collaboration with Museum Studies graduate students and Associate Director Christine Fogarty, we've prototyped and piloted multisensory learning activities on themes of ancient Egyptian writing and personhood. And you can see us doing some of that work here in the slide under engagement, in the picture under engagement. This is where universal design for learning is powerful. UDL here reminds us that when we provide content in multiple ways through visuals, text, audio interaction, and flexible pacing, we reach not just one group, but everyone. For example, multilingual resources or simplified visuals support English learners, but they also help guide younger audiences or anyone new to the material. We also developed a visitor engagement training manual, including scripts and inquiry-based methods for student docents, or who we call engagement specialists in the museum, who are often the first point of contact for visitors and should be trained in welcoming and accommodating the needs of visitors. Similarly, flexible multisensory activities serve neurodiverse learners while enriching the experience for all. Graduate students have contributed by designing object-based activities and leading gallery sessions with ancient Egyptian objects. In other words, applying UDL principles enables us to move beyond accommodations for specific groups toward inclusive strategies that strengthen learning for everyone. At the Global Museum, visitor-centered exhibit development begins with the audience, not just collections or curators. This approach asks us to consider visitors' needs, backgrounds, and modes of engagement, aligning with barrier removal and inclusive frameworks. Both remind us that people experience and process information differently. When developing an exhibit on ancient Egypt, curation and interpretation are central. Curation, the act of selecting and framing objects, is never a neutral act. Choices about display, language, and context all shape the meaning. The interpretation, the stories we tell through objects, deepens connections by layering access points, such as labels, audio guides, sensory elements, storytelling, and inquiry-based prompts, and visitor response talkback stations, as you can see here in the right image. Knowing our campus student audience is central to this work. Through surveys, prototyping, and feedback, we research their interests and balance their needs. Students want access to ancient Egyptian collections, but they also want us to address the ethical responsibilities of stewarding such material, including two mummified individuals housed in a private gallery within the museum. Their input underscores that visitor-centered practice means not only creating access, but also engaging transparency with ethical issues of cultural stewardship. The Egyptian Learning Alcove was created in response to audience research showing a wide range of reactions to the display of mummified individuals. Some visitors expressed discomfort, while others valued the chance to learn through direct engagement. To address this, the museum established the alcove as a private side gallery where the wrapped individuals remain in their coffins and can be viewed only with an engagement specialist. This design sought to balance educational access with cultural and ethical sensitivity. Although the alcove's compact, irregular footprint limited flexibility, creative solutions allowed it to reflect the museum's commitment to an evolving, ethically informed practice, placing cultural sensitivity, historical context, and respect for individuals at the heart of the exhibition design. In the alcove, we are developing the exhibition Afterlives, the stories of objects and people from ancient Egypt. The guiding question, how do we know what we know about ancient Egypt, positions objects and individuals as sources of knowledge, inviting visitors to explore daily life, the afterlife, and museum stewardship. The exhibit integrates colonial legacies, cultural heritage, and the ethical care of human remains with explorations of daily life and funerary practice. Organized into thematic sections, history, object stories, art and text, stewardship and ethics, and mummy misconceptions, the design encourages reflection. At each section, visitors consider provenance, engage with personal stories related to objects, read coffin inscriptions as personal narratives, and examine the ethics of caring for human remains in the museum. A distinctive feature is the wayfinding system, modeled after Egyptian street signs, which combines modern typefaces with ancient iconography, serving as both visual guides and thematic anchors. The signs bridge ancient and modern Egypt, resisting the tendency to treat the past as distant and disconnected, while providing clear labeling and wayfinding for all visitors. To bring innovation and accessibility into learning about ancient Egypt, we developed a series of digital interpretive projects, which we call DIPs, with our students. Rather than overwhelming visitors with gallery text, graduate students in my museum education and public outreach seminar, along with Elizabeth's guidance here, created digital tools that extend interpretation in focused, multimodal ways. Together, these projects expand the exhibition scope by offering inclusive experiences that move beyond traditional display. Instead of reinforcing, quote unquote, the mummy effect of death and spectacle, they emphasize cultural sensitivity, ethical inquiry, and historical context. In this way, the DIPs enrich visitor learning while also equipping emerging museum professionals with accessibility tools to navigate the challenges of representing ancient individuals in museums today.
As Lissette mentioned, I came in as a consultant to work with the students on their projects, using my background in student-led creative digital interactives. So with all the digital interactives that they designed, this question of potential accessibility was at the core. There's many challenges to balance when building digital interactives and with an eye towards increasing accessibility. There's always the barriers of cost. How much is the equipment that you need to use, say for 3D modeling or the software? Time, how time intensive is it? to do the processing or development, for example, for game interactives, and then also technical skill. Um, Most museum staff members don't have a background in computer science, so you have to find flexible and accessible and user-friendly resources to build these interactives. And then also, we tried to find, whenever possible, open source solutions. So, with open source software being free to no cost, that has a lot of documentation that's available to be very transparent in its creation process. We also looked at issues of visual enhancement. Museums at their core are very visual centric, and so visitors with any visual accessibility concerns are left out in many ways. In particular, with 3D enhanced or 3D visualizations, you can use enhancement for zooming and marking out details to draw people's attention to it and giving explanations. And we'll talk about, again, some of our, the students' really creative solutions in terms of enhancing the digital visual resources with this accessibility in mind. We were also able to work with the addition of sound, so guided audio narratives that would essentially work to bring people through the lengthy labels, text labels that would usually be in a museum gallery. And then also haptic or touch potentials. We can't allow visitors to touch an actual ancient Egyptian like plaster and painted Shabti box, but we can play around with 3D printing and other enhancements to bring out that potential and accessibility. And so here in these images in the bottom left, we have an example of the Shabti box that we digitized, and you'll see more of in a second. The middle image is actually a previous cohort of students who are making a 3D model of a canopic jar lid using photogrammetry. And then on the right is an example of the beautiful high contrast images that one of the student groups produced for a visual storytelling narrative. So, my suggestions for anyone seeking out to do this type of project, if you're doing 3D model capture, my new favorite that I'm using because of its incredible ease of use and the fact that it's smartphone or tablet based is Polycam. It is paid, though there's also a free trial period that you can work with it. Metashape is sort of the industry standard for cultural heritage 3D capture processes, but it is quite expensive, though it does have an educational discount. And then also Mushroom is free and open source software that is available for, again, all of these create 3D models of objects through a process called photogrammetry using structure from motion, which I'm happy to talk about at the end if anyone has questions. Then afterwards, you get sort of a raw and sometimes blobby model that you also have to edit. So in terms of 3D model cleanup and then hosting, you have to find a way to post the 3D model on the internet in a way that people can manipulate it. Blender is amazingly powerful free software that again is pretty standard in terms of cultural heritage 3D modeling. And then Sketchfab or Polycam itself have free hosting capabilities. For digital narrative storytelling, which you'll also see today, ArcGIS Story Maps is a great resource. There is a free version that doesn't have quite all of the formatting capabilities. Most educational institutions have a paid license for it as part of the ArcGIS suite. So, for example, um, here at Cal Poly, engineering, geography, geology, environmental studies, they all have a need for ArcGIS. So it's available to the whole university. And then for interactive narrative building, kind of like a choose your own adventure game, I highly suggest Twine. It is completely free. It's very simple at its base, but it's incredibly expandable. You can keep on adding to it and kind of remix it with other digital interactives. and my students have had great success with it. So for the Egyptian alcove at the Global Museum, there's the way that these digital interactives were used or to be used is to have a walkthrough available. So as visitors come into the alcove, there's a QR code, a set of QR codes on a poster. And here's an example of one of the QR codes that are in the process of being designed. And then visitors are able to use the smartphone devices or tablets that they have, or the museum also has an iPad available that will then bring up the digital interactives. You have to look at ways to ease the integration of digital material into the museum experience. This is not a standalone app, for example, that we developed that then visitors have to download. Maybe they don't have access to EduRoam to be able to do so. Are they going to keep it on their phone and delete it? There's all of these barriers to those kinds of applications for museum use. So instead, this is kind of a seamless way of getting people into the interactives. So now we'll go through and highlight several of the interactives and show how the students very creatively designed aspects to help visitors engage with the ancient Egyptian material while also thinking about accessibility. So the story map of Nespam Parenub, graduate students Amy, Victor, and Reese developed an interactive story map to guide visitors through the afterlife journey depicted on Nespa Perenub's cartonnage coffin. Responding to common visitor questions about the meaning of the art and texts on coffins, the project combined high contrast visuals, alt text descriptions, and clear, slow-paced audio narration. This digital interpretive is an accessible and engaging tool that not only interprets the imagery and inscriptions, but also presents them as part of a relatable narrative about life, death, and belief in ancient Egypt. Part of the design process in building this is also students fact-checked in all stages of the development. And so you can see some of the scenes here, and then we have a demo video as well. There we go. So students used ArcGIS story maps for this narrative project. Again, many educational institutions have a subscription to the ArcGIS suite for engineering, environmental sciences, etc. There's a free option available with less formatting options. It's a very user-friendly interface to build these scrolling narratives. You can embed multimedia. What students did here with audio recordings of the narrative text, it's just kind of impossible to have that come through on Zoom without chaos happening. But there is a narration of all of the text that you see scrolling by. And again, with high contrast images in this audio narrative, more low vision visitors can access the content. And Story Maps is also screen reader accessible. So this effectively engages the viewer with the scenes illustrated on the coffin. But there are challenges. So while the alt text provides important access, it has limitations. Visitors with low vision would benefit from an extended descriptive text that offers a fuller overview of each page and its details. And sorry, I should mention that these reflections on the project come from the students themselves as well. Story maps can also be difficult to navigate with a keyboard, posing additional challenges for museum learners with motor or physical impairments. So next up, we have a twine game called More Than a Mummy. In this project, graduate students Sophie and Daria developed an interactive twine experience to guide visitors in exploring the shift from the term mummy to mummified individual. It's framed as a choose-your-own adventure. The interactive journey allows players to engage with different museum stakeholders, each offering perspectives on language, ethics, and care specific to ancient Egypt. In terms of accessibility, this digital interpretive is an accessible and reflective tool that highlights issues of personhood, identity, and consent. It encourages visitors to consider how terminology shapes interpretation and how museums navigate the ethical challenges of displaying human remains. So again, a walkthrough video of it. So Twine is a visual coding system that's very user-friendly, but then infinitely extendable, and you can layer it with other media and game building. It's a non-linear interactive storytelling that encourages replay and critical thinking. And in this case, we're looking at the ethical engagement through character perspectives, allowing empathy and reflective learning. Oh, here's Professor J, based on Professor Jiménez. Um, in this project, there's clear educational goals aligned with social and culturally responsible museum interpretation. And the dialogue trees and cool tool collection mechanics created a layered experience. But there are challenges. While Twine provides flexibility for storytelling, its text-based interface can limit engagement for visitors who prefer visual or multimedia experiences. And balancing narrative depth with interactive pacing was also a challenge when addressing such a serious and sensitive subject. Again, Twine is screen reader accessible. Okay, and then the third project we'll talk about today is Object Stories, 3D Object Engagement. Graduate students Marley, Alex, Amaya, and Viviana created a digital interpretive using Polycam 3D models to bring object-based learning concepts into a virtual format. Their project enabled visitors to closely examine small artifacts from the Egyptian learning alcove, such as the Shabti box and amulets, through high-resolution scans designed to replicate the experience of close looking. How many of us wish you could pick up something in a case and hold it up and look at it closely? The goal was to create an exploratory free-form encounter with objects that could be accessible both inside and outside the museum. In terms of accessibility, this digital interpretive is an engaging way to extend object-based learning beyond the gallery. It encourages reflection, imagination, and personal connection, even when physical touch is not possible. By allowing visitors to interact virtually with detailed scans, the project makes historical information more accessible and appeals to all learners. So here is the video. Um, So in my workshop with the class, we set up a 3D capture station and imaged objects or sets of objects. We used Polycam, which is software that uses photogrammetry or structure for motion. You take overlapping images in a dome around the object, and then it creates a 3D model from that set of images. For the purposes of this project, a quality 3D model was able to be captured using an iPhone 16 Pro, with macro lens capabilities. The students then edited the models to clean up the scene and set up the best lighting. They built a website in Weebly that presents the information and detailed descriptions of the objects. It includes 3D models of the artifacts. Visitors can manipulate the models and zoom in to see details of the tiny amulets. There are a lot of challenges with this type of approach. While the 3D models improved visual access to small objects, the lack of features such as zoom, rotation, and audio descriptions limited accessibility. Future improvements would include transcripts for screen readers, pre-recorded label readings, and multisensory components such as sound design or 3D prints to expand the project's reach and deepen engagement. Let's see, we haven't gotten to the actual, oh, here's the model, so you can see how you're able to interact with them. So you're able to zoom in and rotate to see different angles and different details. And then just hop to the end, especially with the smaller amulets here, you can see how much it really expands your ability to interact with them. Oh, right. I also included this to show the depth of research that the students all did in building these interactives. So you can see overall, in creating accessible digital interactives, there's many shared challenges. The challenge of scope is always a major issue. How can we produce compelling and informative material without making it too complex and making it achievable? There are constraints again in time, technology available to us, and the training to use digital tools, which are all major factors in this. Digital humanities projects also have the problem that's termed hack versus yak. Are you able to hack together the elements and make the interactive that you originally designed, or is the focus more on talking about the possibilities? And these students, I think, showed very much that they are able to hack together the elements and make interactives that are very compelling. When projects are tested and evaluated in a gallery setting, that's the real stress test. Are they robust? Do they work every time? Do visitors respond positively to the level of information and engagement, or are they overwhelmed? Um, this is a time to reassess what you need to do to rework and adjust to meet your intended goals. It's an iterative process. And then again, the fundamental issue of visual accessibility in museums can be compounded by the use of digital interactives. But the projects presented here show how students held this issue in mind during the design process and how they successfully integrated key elements that can increase accessibility for low vision visitors. And then next, in our future directions, we suggest more ways we want to expand these solutions to these issues, especially in levering these digital interactives and models to create increasingly accessible learning materials. Let's get this. There we go. So the goal of the Global Museum is to have 100% plus accessible material. But again, there's the design challenges to achieve this. There's very much a focus on a push to design creative solutions, again, that can benefit all visitors. One of the things that I'm exploring and working with them is how to do enhanced 3D printed interactives. So here you see the model of the Shabdi box, and I'm going in. It's very subtle visually, but I'm editing the surface to bring the decoration, like the lines and the volumes forward, so that you would be able to feel those areas of decoration and get again this haptic touch in order to understand and get the contents of the scene, which then could be 3D printed for use in the gallery. Again, the most important thing to remember is that all of these types of projects have an iterative design. It takes a lot of trial and error and getting input to rework them to come up with creative and the best solutions. And again, why ancient Egypt? This is such compelling material to work with and has such a multiplicity of engaged audiences available to test accessible exhibition design. So thank you for joining us and learning more about our projects. And we want to underscore that accessibility and inclusion are never finished goals. Innovation comes from dialogue, and so now we'd like to hear your perspectives and welcome any questions.
Thank you so much to both our speakers. This has been a fascinating talk, especially as a fellow museum professional. You've given us so much food for thought. And on that note, I'd like to invite our YouTube audience watching live to feel free to put any comments and questions for our speakers in the chat. But I will start us off with a few questions here. One of them is to take us through an example of, let's say, what minimum ADA compliance might look like to help contextualize how the many strategies and interventions that you shared move well beyond that baseline legal measure.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain height requirements within the gallery, certain clearance within doorways, or to be able to move around vitrines. As I kind of mentioned, access, just being able to enter the space physically is important. Lighting is also important. Just not having a barrier into physical access. And then above that, right, going above is trying to, incorporate it's a simple fix that museums tend not to do, but it's just making your text larger, structuring it hierarchically in ways that people can understand it and see it a little bit more clearly. Adding the little thumbnail to a label it seems so minor, but it's actually so huge because people can make connections with objects that aren't directly next to that label. People can look at it a little bit more closely. People can interact with the labels in different ways and make connections in new ways. So that's already starting to go a little bit beyond sort of the basic entry level ADA compliance. And then, of course, you have, it's not just about an audio guide that tells you what you're seeing. It's much more descriptive and enriching language that helps people visually see and navigate the space in ways that are helpful for visitors who have, who are blind or have low vision.
Thank you. Yeah, that definitely puts some perspective on the many strategies that both of you have applied that go far beyond even the very helpful um, features like enlarging text and enriching descriptions. An audience question from Laura Heath Stout, who writes, are the digital pieces available on the website for people who aren't physically in the museum or just linked in the gallery for use in the space on phones?
That's a good question. Right now, they're available to us online, so we're still working on them. But the goal, that would be one of the end goals, which is to be able to host them in a space where people can also interact with them and not have to physically be in the gallery space. That is one of the next stages, yes.
And that's interesting too. The more that you make available online, it increases global accessibility also. This material could then be accessed by students in Egypt, for example. And again, as we kind of all found during the COVID shutdown, places that already had accessible digital materials suddenly became so important and key to learning. So if you're ahead of a curve in terms of online accessibility, then it's very important for everyone having a chance to use it.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say that it's also important for K through 6 engagement too.
Mhm.
We've noticed, post-COVID that there's been a decline in school field trips, especially public school field trips into the museum space. I'm not sure if that's because it's like a funding related issue or it's just like a logistic issue that's just become a little bit more challenging. But to be able to offer those kinds of resources to various, classes and teachers is also another important aspect of accessibility.
Yeah, and certainly here at the Bade Museum, we've also pivoted to a lot of digital and web-based exhibitions and interpretive and didactic projects for those reasons, and have really embraced the value of that, in addition to the traditional analog in-person gallery experience as well. So I appreciate that perspective, and especially the many examples of the blended approach for digital interactives in the gallery as well. Another audience question, this one's from Carl Walsh, who says, thanks for the wonderful talk. I loved all the visuals you had for Twine and the other digital platform. And did you have an artist work on these, or were they produced by you or your students or in-house creatives in your institution?
I'm gonna
Go
Oh,
ahead. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm gonna share the screen again for a second because any of my students know I do this all the time. I accidentally forgot to start sharing my screen, so you missed out one of the most beautiful. Um, are you seeing the head slide now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll put this up while we're talking.
Oh, yeah. The graduate students actually designed everything. They are incredibly talented and they know how to use their skills in creative and innovative ways. And, this stunning artwork was an illustration that was created by Amy, one of the graduate students. In terms of Twine, it was Daria and Sophie, who are also very creative, who did the designing on their own. I think they used I think they used Canva for some of the design elements. And yeah, it's all the students. They're the creative designers and drivers. We're just sort of the architects who are helping them build it.
And in terms of like there's so much discussion of AI generated art right now. I know both Lissette and I have been discussing just testing it out and having incredibly horrible results from it and thinking like it's absolutely essential for museums to be a place for creativity and to highlight artists and have artists involved in the whole process and not rely on generative AI for creating images.
And oh, and I'll also say too, one of the students, Sophie, also created a color scheme and a pattern and a font that everybody used also for consistency too across all the projects. So that's why you can kind of see how they all complement each other very nicely too. So that was also student driven. So they come up with fantastic ideas when we have brainstorming sessions.
Wow, I'm really impressed by that answer. And the work that these students were able to produce. Wow. So pulling on that thread a little bit, this question is coming from my colleague at the museum, Brooke Norton. She asked, since this is a campus museum with a focus on student teaching, do you think this gives you a unique opportunity to test multimodal tools for accessibility that may not be as easy to enact, let's say, in a larger encyclopedic museum?
Yeah, I don't know. Elizabeth has also worked in university museums and done a lot of this. So I don't know if you want to go first and then I can talk afterwards.
I think that's true. I mean, what Lissette even was just talking about in terms of having kind of visual identity and branding and having the flexibility to in a large scale museum, which I've also worked in, there's a very important need for consistency. And so having these opportunities to be really creative and we also in university settings or college settings have so many other colleagues and departments that intersect with museums. That's why I love it. It's like it's a hub for interdisciplinarity and so that's part of our mission, right? Is to test, to learn, to be creative. But there are plenty of non-university museums that also have that impetus for creativity that I can think of, like the Exploratorium, for example. Think about how much has been done through their design labs and stuff that then they take to other educational um, like implementations.
Yeah, and I'll say because the Global Museum is a lab for the program,
Mhm.
we can do whatever we want essentially. We're always trying to be innovative and think about best practices and to come up with solutions to existing problems and new problems that we might discover along the way. I think in many ways there's also flexibility to take our time, to not roll out something very quickly. And in many cases that does happen just because it's student driven. We're doing it in our classes, we're working within the constraints of a semester or an academic year. But that's also kind of what's exciting about it is that we get to have so many different perspectives, collaborating and working together, not just students, but also community partners who are excited to work with us to mentor students, to mentor us even. There's a lot of flexibility in a university museum that you may or may not have in a larger institution, but that doesn't mean that you can't bring it to a larger institution.
Yeah, and on that very note, related question, Dr. Miner, you mentioned towards the end of your part of the talk that the process of creating a lot of these digital interactives is iterative.
Mhm.
So could you walk us through how you go about, let's say, beta testing or adapting these resources and the probably the complications, but also the benefits of being in an institution on a university campus with lots of students?
Yeah, at some point I have an article I just turned in that will be coming out that's called Fail Forward. And it is it's set up as a choose your own adventure game going through the process of building a digital interactive. If anyone's interested in having it now, feel free to email me. I'll send it to you. It's it's like two steps forward, one step back. I structure my classes as a learning lab, so there's every week they have a new step of the project that they have to go through. starting from brainstorming, pitching their project, coming up with a scope of work, doing an ethics audit, doing an accessibility audit, figuring out, okay, gathering all the visual content that I need, wireframing it. There's something called empathy mapping where you make a quadrant that says as people use something, you record what they say, what they did, what they thought, and what they felt. So you get an idea of what a visitor's experience or user's experience is like. And then so bringing in all of that input through the design process. My students end up, if an outside observer just walked past my classroom, they'd be like, "What is going on?" It's just everyone's just talking and laughing because they're all testing out, especially when they're building games, testing out the like playing through um, it, and that's what's great about it is you get a lot of creative energy from that process. You're not working in a silo. You're not working alone without any of that like community input. Um, yeah, so a series of testing and then the final project in a showcase. And students get points for each of those steps along the way. That's really important to me that they, there's so much, every project you're going to put a ton of time into some design element that's just not going to ever work and you have to scrap it, but maybe keep it in mind for trying out another time later. Um, yeah, I take a lot of inspiration from the maker movement. So if you think about you have all of your ideas for different interactives and little boxes around that you can pull back out later and see if that part fits and something else later.
Yeah, and I'll also say too, for context, this is something that we worked on with students last spring, so it's
Yeah.
still very fresh, and we're still thinking about ways to integrate it into the gallery. But as Elizabeth mentioned, all of these projects are scaffolded. So students did the
Mhm.
initial research on the topic, they picked the objects within the exhibition that they wanted to focus on. They did the research, they had all of their sources, their bibliographies, they created a proposal. We were fortunate enough to have Elizabeth up who did a workshop with the students to talk about the technology, the accessibility elements. Students worked on this throughout the entire semester. And at the end, what was so important too is that they had a reflection on it as well. So they talked about their process, challenges that they found along the way, things that they wish they could have done better. I think the general consensus was they wish they had more time to continue building this out, and that's something that we're hoping to continue on in other classes. So eventually, when we roll this out into the museum and test it in focus groups with other grad students or other students from SF State, or even school field trips that come, or some of our accessibility partners, we will likely have another class that does like visitor and audience research who will conduct an entire survey and analyze that data and create a report and give it back to us. So it is a long process. And like Elizabeth said, it's an iterative process. And I always tell my students, what's not important is like a final answer or final product. It's about the process along the way and reflecting on it and finding ways to improve upon it. Um, and and I feel like that's what they've done here.
Another question from Carl that relates to this same topic. And also I'll add so far, or maybe like your preliminary take, out of these digital platforms, have you found one to be particularly effective or engaged with in the gallery?
I would say that Story Maps has the least barrier to users and also to the people who are that are designing it. But it's very extendable. We have used it because it has GIS capabilities also, so you can build a like a world tour. Here's all the objects in a gallery, and it takes you around from place to place. Like I had a student who mapped out uh, instruments from Eurasia and how they were incorporated and like integrated into to North American musical traditions. You can also embed 3D models into it. It's very stable because it's it's coming from ArcGIS from Esri. Um, but you do need like an institutional license for it. Um, that is the go-to when I have students that aren't quite sure what they're going to do, I'm saying, okay, try story maps. If there's somebody who has come with some programming experience or is a little bit wants to kind of push the envelope in terms of like coding and stuff, that's when I send them to there's another game building platform called Bitsy that my students have used a lot. Again, Twine is very easy to use, but then you can keep on making it more and more complicated. That being said, yeah, I'm using Twine to develop like a virtual museum project this year. Start with story maps.
I agree. Story
Move on to
maps,
Twine.
yeah, Story Maps also has accessibility guidelines, like some
Yeah.
sort of basic ways to build in accessibility, excuse me, from the outset, and then you can continue to customize it from there. Yeah, the students who did the other interactives also had computer programming backgrounds too, so that was also really helpful, and I think that's why they were able to kind of go above and beyond in many cases here.
Okay, one final concluding question here. So let's say without computer programming experience and perhaps for museum professionals with budgetary or other resource constraints, what advice do you have to your colleagues for steps that they can take to start improving their accessibility and inclusion in their curatorial and didactic work?
I have a couple ideas, but I don't know if you want to go first. So I would say one is building a community that can give you feedback from the beginning, because you might not realize, because you're so in it, what aspects you can maybe make more accessible in terms of your interpretation, in terms of your label, in terms of your flow and your space, your lighting. And then I would say there's also another project that we didn't dive into too much, but students did build like an audio guide that talked them through the ethics of the term, mummy no longer being used, and that was a very like low cost, easy sort of entry point to just sit there and to go over their script, to think about how to make it accessible, to use. I think they use like some TikTok what's the word I'm looking for? Captioning
Oh, yeah.
elements. They modeled that a lot off of just things that are shorter and more accessible for people. That was sort of like a low like entry point to start. I don't know, Elizabeth, you probably have some better ideas too.
That's what I was going to say is reach out to organizations in your community. Uh, sorry, I'll see when the YouTube video is posted, there's a specific resource, an organization I can post. Um, but say in the Bay Area, there's the Lighthouse Center for the Blind,
Yes. Hmm.
and find someone to consult with and then listen to them, and keep up that relationship, not have it be like a one-time interaction.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for your talk today. I'd also like to invite the audience to join us in warmly thanking today's speakers, Dr. Lissette Jiménez and Dr. Elizabeth Miner, for sharing your work. The next talk in the series will be on October 23rd at the same time, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Eric Harvey will be sharing a talk titled The Real Lives of Blind Mesopotamians. We look forward to seeing